maps, and meta-analysis. This is Folsom.
Facts.
And faces.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Folsom Facts and Faces. We are doing our 2024 election debrief today, and Maclean and I are joined by Jake and Vicente. I'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves. So, Jake and then Vicente, could you introduce yourself, what your role was in this process, and if there's anything in particular you want to talk about today?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Jake. I was an election worker for this presidential election and also the primaries, and I want to say that was March. And my background is I have a master's in public policy and administration, so I come from firsthand experience and also more of an objective analysis experience. Vicente?
Hello, everybody. My name is Vicente. Not quite as accomplished as Jake over there, but I worked the vote centers on election day. I also took part in tear down and setup of all the vote centers around the area in Sacramento.
All right. Well, thank you both for being with us. If you could maybe just start with explaining what your total role was in this process, how that looked like on your day-to-day basis, and your perspective that afforded you.
Sure, and I should also clarify that I did exactly what Vicente did, is we did the tear down, no, not tear down, set up, working the polls, and tear down. Setup is in Sacramento County. That would be on Florin, West Sac, and there's a huge warehouse we go to at 6 a.m. in the morning. And it's sort of what you think. It's we bring everything you see in the polls to the polls, the precincts. So we went all over Sacramento County, set that up, made sure everything was accessible, that it worked, and then there's that. And then for the actual voting process, we were election workers, and I would say there's about 5 or 6 different positions from all the way throughout. And then we also tore down at the end of the day and made sure that there were no missing ballots as well. Just to give a quick summary.
Interesting. So I'm very ignorant of the entire process. I did go in personally to vote, so that's kind of the extent of where my knowledge ends. W with regards to like the setup process and just all of the equipment in general, how much equipment is involved in a process like this? Because it seems like there could be a lot, but I don't know if most people understand.
How Vicente, you start, and then I'll see if you're missing anything.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean there's a lot of equipment, and it's really interesting looking in the warehouses, just duplicates of all of this equipment because it's the same stuff for every single vote center, and all of it is ID'd. So you're gonna have it really depends on each location, but they'll put together kits beforehand of what each center needs and what they're missing to make sure that everybody has the same exact stuff. So whether it's tables, whether it's chairs, whether it's the actual voting booths that people fill out their ballots in, or the touchscreen ones, or the printers. There's a lot of equipment. It's all the same exact stuff at all these centers. And it's really about communicating with each center of what they need and what they don't have so that they can provide it and kind of integrate properly. So every center is set up exactly the same. Anything you want to add, Jake?
Yeah, then so there's the Sacramento County Elections Office, and there's someone whose sole job is to make sure that that is what the equipment is needed in the sense of down to the electrical cords. I mean, there's a certain amount that have to be there, and it's laid out. There's someone who actually maps out every single precinct. And when we set up, we have to use that as our framework, and we cannot switch because it is ensured to be accessible, ensured to hold the amount or work with the amount of people that are going to come in projected wise. And you can't always confirm who's going to come in, who's going to not. Yeah. And then again, yeah, I like what Vicente say, everything is tracked. I mean, there's specific booths. I mean, it is a full warehouse. It's probably what, half the size of a Costco, maybe?
Yeah,
Wow.
and everything is very packed and covered in just equipment, laptops, phones, materials for the day of the election. So when we're setting up these spaces, we set up pretty much like most of the equipment, and then there's a whole just pile of stuff that we leave for the day of that gets set up, like all of the flags and different signs telling people the election center is here. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that gets set up on the day of when they're voting. And then there's the stuff that we set up beforehand, which is just kind of the chairs, tables, printers, checking if everything's working and working flawlessly with each other.
Really interesting. And I'm not sure if you guys would know, but one question that kind of just came to mind during this, while you guys were answering that, I was curious if this equipment gets used for anything else, or is it just for these? I mean, maybe not just general elections, but maybe other elections that the county or the state might do.
So I was told it's specifically for the election process, and the warehouse is locked up. I actually think it might be moved to somewhere even more secure, but it is locked up. And the only reason why it's touched is to make sure that the equipment works. So because again, there's electronics.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you both were poll workers. How did you become a poll worker? Is that something that you sought out to do? Were you recruited, hired like a job listing?
Vicente, you want to go first?
Okay, I'll start. So mine's really interesting. I mean, it was during I believe it's during the primaries where I just went there. We came in, we're selecting candidates with my family, and then one of the workers was like, "Oh, hey, have you guys?" Because she saw I was younger, and so she's like, "Hey, have you considered like working the election?" I was like, "Wait, that's possible?" I didn't even that never like crossed my mind of like, "Oh, you could work the election." And honestly, it's still actually, I don't think most of the public knows because one thing, I mean, just to get off on a little tangent real quick, while working at the centers, a lot of the people are like, thank you for your service, your volunteer service. Like they don't realize that you actually get paid to work the centers. They think it's just completely free, just out of the goodness of your own heart, which is, I mean, I guess it's part of your like service, but you're actually getting paid to work the centers. But it was just a lady who was actually working, and she was like, "Hey, have you considered working the election? We need more young people." And so I was like, "Oh, that's pretty cool." And then I just gave her a call, and that's kind of how everything led to. Jake?
Yeah, I went to synagogue and this one guy was like, "You are working more hard than the guy in the armed forces, like the military specifically." I'm like, I don't know about that. It's like, no, you are just the election worker is highly needed. But yeah, we get paid. In the past, no, but then no one wanted to show up for it to volunteer, unfortunately, for better or for worse. I think there's other states that probably don't pay, but I also could be wrong. I don't want to give misinformation. In regard to, I have a different story. I happen to know the election officer. So we're election workers, and there's one election officer that oversees the process of the voting process when you're at the precinct election day. And I just literally saw him because he was working at UPS, and he's like, "Oh, Jake, you want a job?" I'm like, "Sure, why not, Kyle?" And then bada bing, bada boom, I'm now working. I don't know how the other jobs are filled either because ours are different than the people counting the votes. And then there's some people in charge of outreach to get people to vote, just in general, not for a candidate, but just in general, like more information about voting, how to get registered, all of that. And I think there's other positions as well. I have no idea how to get those jobs. I have not seen a job listing. There might be a job listing. I just don't know.
Yeah.
That's fair. I appreciate that. And while you were mentioning it, something that I wanted to that I was kind of thinking of as like a good follow-up question was, curious in that like interview and hiring process, because I think you're right. Like most people maybe don't know that poll workers are paid. Like I didn't really know that myself. Um, was curious like what kind of you know, uh, how standard of an interview process was that? Because this feels like a very official sort of thing, right? Was there like an extensive background check that was kind of done on you guys, or was it something, maybe a little more casual or informal than that?
I don't know about Vicente, but for me, my very intense background check. How old are you? 18. Are you an American citizen? Yes, you're hired. Like the good old days, right?
Just
That
like
is,
them.
why can't it be like that everywhere? No, yeah. I mean, I think it was the same exact thing. I mean, I don't know what they did behind the scenes on theirs, if they were doing background checks or anything, but in terms of like what I saw during that process, it was, yeah, it was really just that of just like, hey, how old are you? Like, it was just kind of simple questions of like competency. Like, are you like detailed enough to not mess up numbers or counting when you're doing things? And it was really just aimed at figuring out if you let small things slide or if you really care about each detail and ensuring everything was correct the entire time. But yeah, no background checks or not that I'm aware of
You got more
on my
questions
end.
than me. Are you good with numbers? They didn't ask me that. They just asked if I was American citizen, 18 years old, and that's pretty much it. I think when we're doing training, don't they ask for your social security number though? I could be wrong.
Yeah, yeah. So they
Okay.
ask for all of your information. I mean, because that's also how you're gonna get paid as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, other than that, they just have you fill out. They have you sign a lot of documents that are like oaths to do your service towards the election and keeping it fair. And so they're constantly making sure you have those documents signed at every step of the way, and you're making these oaths. Like I think we were when I worked the actual day of on election day because I was new, it was my very first time. They had me stop and they came together with me and me and another person at the center we were sworn in. We were read all of the different oaths for the election and we were sworn in and we took that oath and then signed as well and everything.
What kind of supervision did you have on the day of voting itself?
I, I'll take that one. So we have at every vote center, there's an inspector. So their job is they have a lot more responsibilities, and you will see somebody who's just in a chair, kind of behind everybody else, looking at like it looks like they're just doing nothing, like they're just sitting there staring at people. But they probably have the most important job at the voting center because they are there looking at every single person working and making sure they're doing their jobs correctly, that the positions are filled. Like something else we could talk about when we get more deeper into the roles, making sure everybody is in their role and not abandoning their stations. And then they're there for questions. They're there to make sure everything's going smoothly. And so that one person you see that looks like they're doing nothing is like the highest oversight, making sure the process is smooth and there are no errors in it.
Wait, yours just sat in a chair the whole time?
Not the whole time, but for the
Mine did
most
not.
part, they had a chair just in the back.
Yeah, mine was moving around, and like if people had to go on lunch or break, then they just switched out. Wow, you're just okay.
Oh yeah, I mean they were doing that, of course, but I mean our center was pretty smooth. She seems like she's been doing it for a long time, so she had everything, and she had a specific team. So the inspectors they get to kind of choose the people at their vote centers, and so like a lot of these inspectors they've been doing it for a while, so they already have their team of people who know exactly what to do, and they all know their favorite positions, how to do it to their highest ability, and so it seemed like she already had a team of people she already knew and so they already knew their jobs. And so I was really like the only new person that she was training and had all the questions. But yeah, it was pretty smooth at mine.
Okay, so
That's fair.
shifting perspectives a little bit, can you take us through the process of an in-person voter? So, for context, I vote by mail. I've always voted by mail, and what would it look like for me if I wanted to go to a polling center on the day of? What would be the steps that I would go through before I've officially casted my ballot?
So, okay, I'll do my absolute best to remember all of this. So, first of all, you are given, I think in the mail too, you're told where your precinct is, but you can vote anywhere in Sacramento County, it's fine. So, you could actually, we had voters from different counties. You're not really supposed to, but we'll take it if it's drop off. Anyways, so you go to your precinct, right? And you can still drop off or vote in person. So, you walk in, there might be a line, hopefully not. But you walk in, and then there's the check-in officer, and they ask, "What's your name? First name, last name, birthday." We cannot ask for your ID.
Driver's license. Yeah, ID.
Yeah, driver's license. If for some reason you are a new vote, there's only so many. That's like a rare time. Isn't like if they never voted before or something like that, they just moved, they have to show some form or they're like a new, like they're an immigrant. Then they have to show
Yeah,
not
there's like
again, it's not California ID. It's like literally a Sam's Club membership that counts. Remember
Yeah,
that?
no, it's like a really,
That
really
counter.
like extremely rare situation where I think it's if they're just not registered at all federally, and there's a really specific
Uh-huh.
scenario that rarely, if ever, happens, but it's there. Yeah, that you're talking about, Jake. Yeah.
Yeah, but we typically what we do is conditional voter registration. That means if you just moved in, if yeah, if you just moved in, we can't find the system for some reason that you'll still be able to vote, but you have to fill in the information in a separate packet and then give it to us. And then so your vote will be counted, but want to make sure that you can even vote in the county, in the US, etc. So there's like a separate process for that. That goes back to the election process. So then after, let me think. So after you're checked in, and when I say you're checked in, so you get your name, and basically they print out an ID that you need to verify to make sure that's you. And then we put it down on a paper, and then you sign it, which says that you voted because your ballot, it's not, it's counted, of course, it's not associated with the ballot that you're given. Your name, no information of you, of your identity is on this ballot. It is just this, it tells us that you signed in, which means if you, let's say, vote somewhere else, which you shouldn't do, but if you do, then it won't, you can't because you already signed and said that you voted. That's why when you do the mail-in ballot or when you mail or they have you sign your name, which means that you voted, which means your vote counts, which is how they track that information. After that would be, what was it, the CVR next? No, if you want to vote in person or touch screen, then you get to choose touch screen or not in person, but the what's it called? The regular paper ballot.
Yep.
The touch screen is not connected to the internet. There's no internet. It's basically a iPad that prints out. It's like paper, but you can touch, it's like how do you explain that, Vicente? How did you explain
Yeah,
that?
so I mean, instead of like it's when I was explaining it to voters, it's not connected to the internet at all. It's just a easier way to fill out your ballot. So instead of like with manually with a pen filling in every single circle, you just tap your selections and it prints it out filled already. So it's just a easier, quicker way. It's just another way to fill out your ballot. And it fills the ballot out for you. It prints, and then it's like a normal ballot that you have. It's just printed out already filled, and it still goes through the same exact process as somebody who's filling it in with the pen. As Jake said, is not connected to the internet at all, so it doesn't get counted through the digital touchscreen. It's literally just there to make it easier for people to vote or for people that have accessibility, hearing issues, blind. It's just different way to allow people to fill out their ballot. And then that all goes into the ballot drop box the same way as the paper one that you fill in manually with a pen.
And then after that, when you vote, and if you need assistance, then there's someone there who watches, just an extra. And like, for example, I helped someone fill out their ballot. Well, not, I helped someone. I didn't hold up. I'm trying to say this correctly. There was someone who only spoke Farsi. So I had to call and get an interpreter, and then they filled them out. But I made sure, like, this is, yeah, I read it out to them. There's an interpreter, all of that. And when that occurs, if someone helps out with your ballot, then the participant, the voter has to say that someone, like, on a paper, legal document, that someone helped you, like election officer helped you, who did this, etc., to make sure everything's good to go. Um, and then after you vote, you go to a blue box where you put the vote, what's it called? Where you put your ballot in, and someone has to be stationed there at all times. And also you have to put a secrecy folder too. So you get that a while back, but that ensures privacy. And if you are uncomfortable, if you think that we're going to look at it, I personally don't care. It's just like, please vote. I want people to vote. But you can put the secrecy folder and the ballot into the blue box, but that is where that's where it's counted, and it's also hoisted around a table, or anchored around a table. So if someone tries to steal, it's pretty obvious and pretty difficult. As well as the inbox, what's it called? Mail drop box.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
in the
understood.
voting center and it's also anchored to the table as well.
Wow, that's fascinating. I wanted to talk about voter ID. Now, I know this is something that's kind of proposed in, some kind of political context and social circles, and there's a lot of, like implications associated with the voter ID. And we're going to kind of, just for the sake of argument, we're going to ignore all the sociological different topics that could be associated with voter ID. But just from purely from a process standpoint, how would a standard issue voter ID impact the process? Would it make it more efficient? Would it make it maybe less efficient in your opinion? In terms of just like, getting from point A all the way to the very end of the voting process for in-person voters primarily.
Vicente, do you want to start? Do you want me to start?
Sure, I can go. I can start.
Cool.
Personally, I think it'd make it a lot more efficient, just for like check-in, really, to speed up that process. Because that, when I was working at these centers, that was really a big like slowdown, was getting people checked in. That if it took a long time at any part of the center, it was at check-in, where you're confirming and trying to make sure their addresses are correct, it's the right exact person. Because I mean, when you're doing countywide, you have people with the same first name and even the same last name, and you got to figure out which one is this voter you're talking to. So you're checking in the right person, and not giving them somebody else's ballot. And so, I mean, I think the ID allows all the information to be congregated into like one easy kind of like profile place to speed up the process. What do you think, Jake?
So in the state of California, we don't require this. Other states do. Are you asking like personal or more objective? Just to reiterate.
I think, I mean, I'd be interested in either. I feel like your personal opinion matters a lot here just because you have the experience working the process. I think objectively would be good to hear as well, if those differ at all.
Okay. Objectively, your name is in the system if you're supposed to vote here. And if it's not, that's why we have the conditional voter registration form. And then it's handled in a completely different process through the County of Sacramento Elections Office. Switching to more of a subjective, I will say that there were a couple houseless people, and not all of them. I mean, again, we can't ask for your ID legally, but there were some who didn't have ID. They were asking, they say that, I'm scared, like I don't have an ID. And so someone who's lived here but isn't able to go to the DMV or doesn't have the funds to do that. So now you're preventing them from voting. So
Yeah, because that's, I think, a lot of most forms of identification require an address. And yeah, it's a perfect example. If you don't have an address, you won't be able to register for an ID.
Mhm.
Okay. No, I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, and I mean the CVR thing was really good because I think an inspector talked to us specifically about that. They're like, "Yo, what if a homeless person comes in and they have like an entire process for that, which is because you need an address in this process, but like if they don't have an address, what do you do?" And so you actually put the kind of the cross streets of wherever they stay, like wherever they're located at, wherever their tent is, um, just some sort of location where they can be found is what ends up getting put in for them.
The cross street specifically, yeah. And
So,
we have to call someone too about that as well. If anything weird or questionable happens, we just call the office and they have the answers for us. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
so, with all these steps of verification that you've mentioned, the database as it exists, and all the different processes that you are very specifically required to go through under these certain circumstances, taking it to more of a high level process and not trying to be as political as the discussion around this is, but I guess starting with you, Jake, how easy would you say it is for someone to commit voter fraud if I wanted to, say, illegally vote a second time, or if I was not a citizen and I wanted to vote?
Using my education here and also as the experience. Okay, sure. Uh, I will say that voting in person, I would argue, more difficult because we have to know who you are. And again, if there's anything questions, we send it out to the office and they might call you for a follow-up. If if the what's it called? If there was one time where there was a CVR2 where there was a name, but then the ballot wasn't fully put in or something like that, they're gonna call you. So, and that I think like it's just I assume it's to streamline the process. And then I would say though for vote in might be more easy because, and I'm not gonna name any people that I know or anything, but sometimes when you're abroad or sometimes when you are in a different state and you can't vote, right? Then you have someone else you know fill it out for you and forge your signature. So I would say when you mail in ballot process, it's probably easier to do election fraud than the in-person voting.
Before going to Vicente, for your take on that, with regards to the mail-in process, though, if someone were to do that scenario that you suggested, where they forge someone else's signature, they would not be able to vote a second time, right?
Yes, but you could also potentially argue, and I mean, I haven't really mailed in ballot for a while, but let's say if you're a college student and you're in a different state or if you're a different country, just, I don't know, just forget, typically you have to sign that says that you voted and then you request someone that you know to vote for you. But typically you're supposed to sign it. But if you can't, and they fill it out, someone else fills it out, that technically could be, because they might change what you want to vote for. That would technically be election fraud.
Vicente, do you have any other additional take on the voter fraud
Honestly,
question?
yeah. I mean, I would just mostly agree with Jake. I definitely think the mail-in would be, if there was going to be fraud, it would be with mail-in, just because like there's less of a process. More of it is with the actual voter controlling all of the different elements of the ballot versus actually in person. There's so many eyes and there's so many the like processes that exist to confirm and verify and make sure. And you're there in person, you can see them voting with it, and everything's matched up triple, quadruple times everything is checked in the actual vote center. So yeah, I would think if there was fraudulent activity, it would be more likely. I don't think there's still tons of checks for the mail-in, but if there was any avenue where it would go through, it'd probably be the mail-in where there's less oversight, I guess.
Okay.
Interesting. No, I find that a very fascinating topic. It's something obviously very relevant in the news today. Um, and this is definitely kind of more of a personal question. I wonder, given your experiences, how much of the discussion and the discourse on voter fraud today do you think is more of a political tool versus a actual issue that affects, like counties or states or even at the federal level, like in terms of just like cases of fraud or incidents? I mean, of course, I know that you guys don't, monitor all polling places across the United States or anything like that, but just based on your experiences, how much of it feels real versus maybe like an online discourse?
And as a possible addendum to that, yes or no, in your role as a polling worker, did you witness any voter fraud?
Technically, no. However, there was a voter who Bro, I'm pretty sure voting polls close at 4 p.m. ever across the nation. And then this person happened to be annoyed because the signs pointed towards us. So they came in and they're like, "Can we vote?" It's like, "No, but we're open tomorrow." And then they're like, "Well, the signs should not point this way, they should point out." And then well, I would say the next day we showed up and all the signs had been moved, which technically could be considered tampering with the election. Because you can't move sides, right? Because then that could be. So, but anyways, that's why we get up early in the morning to fix everything or whatever. But that was probably the only instance that I saw any sort of thing nefarious. Or maybe not nefarious. I think she wanted to do it, so not confuse people. But please don't touch the signs. Please don't.
I feel like that should just be a general rule. Like, please don't touch the process. It is set up, it is intentionally designed and thought of. Yeah.
And this, I've worked in Folsom too. Yeah. Vicente, did you see anything interesting
Yeah,
in terms of fraud?
I everything went extremely smoothly at my vote center. We had near the end a bit where we had counted all the ballots, the actual ones, just to check that because there was two. There's the one for the candidates, and then there's all the propositions. So there's two, and they had to be connected, and we were counting those to make sure that we had the same amount of both of them. And there was a little part where we didn't, the numbers didn't match up. It was one off. And we literally, our entire team stayed there for however many, I think like an hour, like recounting and making sure that everything's there. We literally tore the stack down and went back through it over and over and over again to make sure that it was exactly 200 and 200 on both sides. And then we ended up finding one of the ballots was in the wrong stack. So page one was in page two. And that's what was throwing off the numbers. And so, like, there was, yeah, in terms of what I've seen through the process in the county of Sacramento, I don't think there would be any possibility. I'm super confident in the process in the county of Sacramento. I can't say for the rest of the US. I have no clue how they run their things, but just based off what I've seen here, it is very cemented and official. Everything's verified. So there was nothing other than, I mean, like if you want to riff off of what Jake was saying, I was told that there's a lot of their signs get stolen. So like the
And
different
flags.
flags saying vote center, all of the signs pointing to the vote center, they get destroyed, they get stolen, they get moved, and they have to call in more supplies to reset it up.
Which
Um,
is your taxpayer money, yeah.
yeah,
Also, electioneering was a huge issue where I was. That was fun. And the people who over, because there's volunteers that can, make sure that everything's okay. I forget what they're called, like poll visitors. They kept talking about
watchers.
politics. Can't do that.
So actually, that was a great follow-up. For those who don't know, what is electioneering? What does that mean?
So, Vincente, do you
That's
wanna,
all you.
I
I'll
have
leave
to
that
do
one to you.
it? All right, all
Yeah.
right. So, electioneering. In the election, you must be 100 feet away of having it's changed too, but you can't have the name of the whoever
Candidate,
candidate,
candidates.
you can't have the proposition number, you can't have an image of the face. The slogan is okay. Sometimes not. That's very confusing to me.
Yeah.
And you can't convince someone to vote one way or the other within 100 feet, or that's a federal crime. And I'm not about to go to federal prison, for whatever.
No, absolutely not. That's interesting. Did you guys happen to notice any incidents of like that? I had personally seen on like the news people wearing, certain shirts campaigning for a certain candidate. Did that happen to you guys?
Yes.
Really?
Of Vicente, but yes, yeah. And this
I
was in
guess
Folsom too, right? It's like, yeah, no, people, and there was some points where I was looking by the inspector that was like, this seems like, I don't know if this is okay or not, because they had the face of a candidate, but they had sunglasses, so it doesn't count. And I'm like, I think everyone knows this, like who this candidate is. Like, that's pretty obvious. One person wore a hat, and then they did their best, but they instead of just taking the hat off, which is like, come on, they literally just folded it so you couldn't see the name in the back. And then you had one person who wore like totally the candidate you knew for a fact, and they were wanting to know the rules. And we have an actual place where the rules are. And he just decided to come in all the way the voting center instead of my inspector was trying to tell him like please like wait, but he didn't. He's like, I need to take a photo of this, so he totally broke the law coming all the way and taking a photo of the thing. Yeah.
Wow. Was there any sort of like enforcement? And Vicente, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting after Jake has answered.
you're
I was
good.
but curious like enforcement too. Does that because I feel like if you're breaking the law right inside of or outside of a election center, would there be some sort of like enforcement for law enforcement?
For me, I mean, my biggest concern was when they were finding what bombs in the election poll. Remember that, Vicente? Like there was the state or something where that happened. I'm like, oh boy, now they're like trying to kill the workers. I'm like,
Oh,
great, that's fun. I would think about it. That was my biggest concern. Where I was, I was at City Hall, so we were right next to the police station. So if something really bad happened, they're right there. At the election county office, I don't know if they used to, but now there's a fence around the entire perimeter of the, like for the warehouse and all of that. And then we're next to the sheriff's office. So if anything happens, they're literally right there. I didn't have there wasn't anything internal that said, oh no, I have to call the police. Yay.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the vote centers, if there is like the electioneering, we just kind of, for mine, we hand it to the inspector, who's the overseer of it, who then talks to them and says like, "Hey, you can't be in here with that. You're not allowed to have the names." But yeah, what Jake was mentioning was really interesting. Like, you can't have the face or the name, but then like you could have like if you had all their apparel, like if they had merchandise, you could wear their merchandise as long as it doesn't say their name, which is really interesting. Mine, we didn't have any problems other than a lady who came in, who was saying that somebody in the parking lot was talking about something. And then she got into like an argument with them in the parking lot. And I mean, I don't think we can really enforce that because it's out in the parking lot. We can't like dictate what they say or talk about like outside of the election center. Um, but yeah, mine, we didn't have any problems other than a lot of people wanting to take photos and videos, which is fine. But a lot of people we had to shut down because when it comes to photos and videos, it's not that you can't record us or we're trying to hide anything. It's that if you take a photo or video, like these are in private buildings, and so you have to get permission from every single person in that room if you're taking a photo or video of them. And so, unless you're willing to do that and get their permission signed and everything to do that, you can't take photos, but you can take pictures and videos with just you in it, as long as you don't include other members of the public or even the workers if they don't consent to being in your video. So I'm sure there's a lot of people we shut down who probably like they weren't too happy about it and they might have thought like, oh man, they're trying to hide something they can take photos and videos as long as it's just them in it. They can do the entire center as long as nobody else's face is in it. And so we would just tell them to, because some people it's their first time, and so they want to take a picture. It's their first time voting, and so we would tell them they could take a picture with the drop box, with their ballot, take a picture with the sign outside that says vote here, with their ballot, different stuff. And so that's the only thing.
There were so many new voters. It was amazing. We applauded every single time there was a new voter. Gotta support it.
So I think that's a good segue into my next question. And Vicente, if you don't mind answering first this one,
Yep.
is if I were to go vote, especially with people potentially trying to record a little too much in voting centers, um, would someone be able to track down my voting history, like whether or not I voted? And for context, I got something in the mail this election that was like my voter report card that showed I had voted in all the elections previously that I was eligible to vote in. So that lends me to think that there's something out there that shows that I have voted, so there's a record. But how detailed is that, if you know?
That is really interesting. I personally don't know about that. It's my first time working the actual election centers. Um, so I would actually pass that one to Jake, who would know more of the like processes
I've
regarding
never heard of
that.
this report card. That's pretty cool. I want a report card. Oh my gosh. I mean, as long as you don't give me like A, B, C, D, F, I'm done with school. I don't want to deal with that again. But in regard to what is true, is that so in terms of how do I know that you voted? So to reiterate, whenever you vote, you have to sign that you voted. So that mail-in ballot, you signed that with your name and your address, and it was sent to you. So that has been counted. Or when you're voting in person, you have to, even if it's conditional voter, even if it's a check-in, you have to sign your name. That says you're voted. Do we know how you voted? No. I don't have a ballot on me because why would I have a ballot? I mean, I guess people might keep their ballots, whatever. But um, the ballot, if you look at it, there's nothing. There's no barcode that has your identity. There's no name on the ballot. I mean, when I also print, right? We print the ballots too. The only thing that we have to type in is the precinct number. That's it. That's it. That's the
Yeah.
only thing counted. We have no idea how you voted.
Yeah, there's like even if we like wanted to, like when we're counting these ballots, there's no information on the ballot that
Yeah.
identifies you. So other than like just saying that you voted with the sign-in sheet, like Jake was talking about, the actual ballot, if they were to record you filling out your stuff, um, the only way they would know that you voted for specific candidates is if they were literally right over your shoulder filming exactly what you're circling and then your face and you turning it in. But in terms of just the actual ballot itself, there's no way of actually connecting it to you.
I am curious, Justin, did they grade you on this report card? Like, what did this look like?
I mean, it was basically just showing since 2016, which was my first election,
Okay, cool.
that like, oh, look, here's every primary and general election since then, and a little
Okay.
status after a colon saying whether or not I voted, which said I just said voted, 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 voted. So it was
Okay.
not no grade attached to it, thankfully.
Well, I would argue you got an A plus in voting. That would make it.
Well, I'm probably a little bit more politically involved than your average person. Not a lot of people host a podcast on local politics for fun,
Uh,
but
yeah, that would do it.
um,
You also got a master's in the same.
true, true.
Yeah.
Taking a little bit of a step back, maybe towards a high level description of the process. Jake, if you don't mind answering this one, if you know first, how are polling centers determined?
Oh, you mean like specifically?
Yeah, like where, like I think typically city halls, libraries, there are common
Okay,
locations, but like
so
who makes the determination?
I did actually ask this question to this man whose name I forget. I just know his kids were Jewish. I'm like, oh, I'm Jewish. That's cool. Anyways, so he said that they work with the centers. So they have a lot of churches, which personally is interesting because you know, but like separation of church and state, who cares? Anyways, so the churches, they do community centers. We did that. What else did we do? Libraries, which that's like, oh,
Libraries.
yeah, more hope. So a bunch, it basically just who's available, and then apparently sometimes they charge. Actually, a lot of them charge, which kind of rude of them, in my opinion. Like we're just trying to have hope, but whatever. So they charge, and I guess one of the most expensive was it a community like a gym slash community center? I don't think it was Vicente's. No, I don't think it was the racquetball club that you were at, which is like that's such a cool location. I did the city hall. Yo, there was a wedding. The second day there was a Comic-Con, and the third day there was a not karaoke. That would be great. But what's it called when you're older? You like to play not violin, but the Hawaii, the instrument.
Banjo, ukulele.
Banjo.
Ukulele?
Thank you, ukulele. Yeah, that's what was going on. That wasn't considered questionable at all, but that is what happened during the election process when I worked there. Did that answer your question?
It did, thank you, and I
Great.
feel like I probably should have answered or asked that one early on.
Okay.
Kind of getting towards the wrap up here. Vicente, I feel like you kind of touched on this a little bit when you were describing having to do a recount for an hour when there was a number that was off by one. At a high level, Vicente, since I already mentioned you, if you don't mind starting,
Yeah.
why does it take so long, this process? And do you think that that is for a specific reason that it takes so long?
Yeah, I mean, I think the speed more or less has to do with budgets. Because I mean, if you wanted to speed something up, you could have a million people working in one day to get it done immediately, but then the cost would be astronomical because now you're hiring millions of people. But in terms of just like what we have and the amount of people we have, it takes so long because of all the checks. We double, triple, quadruple a million times check it over and over. And so, in terms of efficiency, it wouldn't be efficient because we're repeating the same exact thing over and over, but that's due to make sure like the precision that everything is actually spot on, um, and the integrity is there and there's no errors. And so I'd say that contributes to probably most of what takes so long is verifying that there's nothing wrong, there's no errors. And so even again, just like at my center when we had just one number off, we literally it was like the sky is falling when that happened. And we're like, where's this one ballot that we're missing? And so we would have tore the whole center down to find this ballot and make sure it was there. And so for my center, and I'm sure with everyone else, a lot of the time comes from just that verification process of repeating it over and over to make sure everything's correct. Jake?
Is this the last day of voting? Why is it not counted as one day like different countries? Is that what you're asking? Or
Well,
the
just
final
kind of
process of when we're double counting on election day?
really, I think more just at a high level. Why is it not you necessarily know the final vote total on the same day?
Sure. Number one, people mail in ballots until 5 p.m. of election day. So the mail carrier can ask to get all that kind of takes a little bit. I mean, if we maybe had, like autopilot cars legalized, maybe that would help the process, but we don't have that yet. Anyways, so we have that. And then for election, it's what, 8 p.m. However, if there is a voter there before 8 p.m., we are required by law to let them vote. There are some places, I think it was what the last, I mean, there's these places where they're in snow around the country and they're waiting 2 hours in line to vote. We legally are required to count their vote. There is someone who will stand at the very end of that line that says you cannot vote. However, someone's about to throw a fit. Then like, sure, you can vote, but it's not going to count. We have to actually write that this is not, you can't because this is after the time. So there's that. Um, Conditional voter registration as well. So again, if you're from out of county, you need to get the approval right from the elections office, make sure your vote counts, make sure you live there, right? And so they have to do all that back work on the end. And it's also a lot of votes. If you go into, you can go too, at the West Sac where we were, no, South Sac, South Sac.
South side, yeah.
Yeah, you can actually ask, can I see this process? And you're going to see a bunch of people working. I don't know how they got their job. That looks like a fun job, but they got their job, and then there's a huge, huge machine. And then I don't know how it works exactly. I mean, it does what it needs to do, but it counts all the ballots. And I mean, it's huge. It's like a newspaper machine, assembly machine. It's pretty cool, actually. Makes a lot of noise. Also, there's more people on election day, which is why Vicente and Vicente and I counted maybe like an hour later because what we had, I think 300 voters and you had like 700 that day, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's one thing that they did say is like in terms of voter turnout, it was significantly more than other years. So this was a huge just kind of day for the election. Because I mean, I think when they were planning with numbers they saw before. And so like my vote center, we were running out of everything because they didn't anticipate so many people to be coming out to vote. And I was giving people non-English stickers. I voted stickers because we didn't have any more English stickers. So I think that that also played. I think it's hard to anticipate how many people actually are going to turn out for the vote center. Yeah.
We also ran out. They had to wait for an, is that my mic? We also ran out. I mean, they had to wait for an hour. I felt bad for them. Some people left, but yeah, happens
Yeah, I
sometimes.
personally ended up with a Russian I voted sticker. Same situation. End of day probably was, kind of dragging it on, but no, that's really interesting. And I kind of wanted to tie, a little bit of like your perspective into the last question, and I'll ask each one of you because I'm curious both you guys' opinions. Um, but I was wondering if like you had any suggestions or improvements for the process in general. Um, and Jake, we can start with you. Obviously, I know that you guys might in the future want to work in these places, so feel free to share whatever perspective you want. But I was curious if there's improvements that you identified in your time there.
Okay, I will start. Oh, Elizabeth, Cynthia, you want to go first? It's totally fine.
That's all. That is
Okay,
all
because
okay.
I have some concerns about inefficiency, and I think Vicente, I was with Vicente, and I was complaining most of the time about this because it really irked me because it's taxpayer money. But the first thing I want to say is if you have questions, feel free to ask us, and please remember if you're voting, most of us, at least I did, I live in Folsom, and so if you're rude to me, I'm going to see you at the grocery store. Please don't be rude to me. Um, yeah, no, I'm here to answer questions. And I think what's really hard to hear is again, I am your community member and you do not trust me. And I've got that a lot of times. Like we are willing, when we spoil or surrender a ballot, we basically obliterate it. And when I say obliterate it, we obliterate it. The government does. And so people just didn't trust me to take care of that, which is, and then they also say, I just don't trust like you or the government. And I'm like, I literally live 3 streets away from you. Like, I'm not trying to commit election fraud. I don't want to go to prison. I'm a citizen of the United States. I'm not like trying to commit espionage or anything. Anyways, so that's the first one. Number two, and then since maybe can add on this as well, but I feel like during the setup and teardown process, we wasted a little bit of taxpayer money. For example, a lot of, and I will say in our contract, we don't have to be there for 8 hours, but we got a lot of overtime. One example why we got overtime was because the higher up decided to go on lunch late, and they were in the building, but because they were on lunch, they couldn't excuse us, and so we had an hour overtime. Another example was, I think for lunch, where sometimes we had what was it, 1.5 hour, 2 hour lunch, Vicente?
You during the setup?
Yeah, and tear down.
I don't know about 2 hours, but we had I think it was like an hour lunch because I mean, it all comes down to like the timing of everything. So we have
That's
multiple
true.
routes going out. We have multiple routes going out. And so if one finishes their setup earlier, we're left kind of in the warehouse, like organizing or just sorting or just kind of doing like remedial, I think that's the word, task, just kind of to keep ourselves busy, while we wait for other teams to show up. And I mean, I don't know how you could coordinate the perfect arrival of every single team because we're all getting sent out to different locations. So some are getting sent out further, some are closer, some another thing just for setup, off tangent, setup or tear down, these centers are manned by other people that aren't with the county. And so we may show up and they don't even open up the church or building
That's
for an
true.
hour or 2 hours. And we're sitting having to wait or go to another location. But the other location might not open up till 12 p.m. And
Mhm.
we're sent out at 6, 7 a.m. And so they also have to try to coordinate when these centers are open for us to get in. And then we also have to depend on the people who are like running these locations, these venues that we set up in, that they're gonna do as they say and be there and show up and open it for us at the designated time. And then another issue is when we're going to these locations, we're calling the people ahead of time saying, hey, we're gonna show up. You guys there? You need to be there. So when we get there, it's open, we can set up. And a lot of times we called and we were given the wrong number, like for somebody that worked there 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And they're like, oh, excuse me, I don't work there anymore. Sorry. I can try to contact somebody, but I don't work there. And so we're left in the dark just trying to figure out how to get into these locations. So that also contributes to like the inefficiency, but I'll let Jake continue.
I was
Continue
just
to
gonna
go.
say pay wise, I feel like the higher up was more willing for us to be a full 8 hours, even overtime, just in case they wanted us. But there were several times where I was wanting to do something, but I was specifically told to hold off, and sometimes didn't work 1 to 2 hours every single shift. Which to me was like this is a waste of taxpayer money because this is now overtime. And it's not just me, it's other people as well. It's not, yeah. And so if that's how the system works, that's a lot of money. So to me, it bothers. If it's not tax-free money, I mean, I think regardless, I'm a hard worker in general, but that did irk me. I'm sure there might be a reason why, but as a worker, that really, really annoyed me. Well, and a taxpayer too.
A worker and a
It's
taxpayer.
like, this is more money. I guess my money's coming back to me, right?
Yeah. And so in terms of improvements for it, I mean, I mean, it really just has to do with more research and planning regarding specific centers and just making sure the contact details are there. I mean, because like Jake mentioned, these places are they're actually getting paid. It's like you're renting out a venue. So they're
Mhm.
renting out the space temporarily for the election to have all the vote center equipment so people can go there and vote from the local community. So, I mean, really just your normal, I would say it's fairly normal because I like do business and a lot of stuff with things like that. And so in terms of organizational inefficiencies, just kind of what ends up happening with communication, where you have like communication issues from the bottom to the top and it's just not getting through. And so all the inefficiencies that come around that, um, those exist. But I mean, I wouldn't say there's anything extremely bad where we're just like burning money for nothing. Um, all of it is for me. I don't know about Jake, but for me, within like your natural, what would occur for inefficiencies that you would see even in like a private company, um, probably a little more lenient as it is like the government, which like we know, like people always make jokes about the DMV because it's so slow and inefficient. And so probably the same similar thing with um, anything related to the government.
I will
Well,
also say, as an election worker, that if for the polls, is that you have to sign something that says if you don't show up, you are fined and potential jail sentence. That's how serious they take it. I don't think warehouse was like that because there are people that didn't show up, but definitely when you're working the polls, yeah, yeah.
well,
Good time.
thank you both for your perspectives today. Appreciate you volunteering your time with us, even if it wasn't volunteered for working the election. And we hope that we can have you on again sometime. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you guys.